Hey, Post Road Jen. Welcome to the Explicitly Pro-Life podcast. I'm your host, Kristan Hawkins.
The pro-life movement as a whole is striving every day to ensure that no woman in an unexpected pregnancy stands alone.
On August 28th, church leaders around the U.S. are gathering to learn how to support pregnant women in their communities. And here's why. Since Roe v. Wade, women in our country have been lied to. Over 73% of Americans don't know where to find nonviolent pregnancy resources in their own communities, while abortion continues to be promoted and made easily accessible. As we step into a post-Roe America, Christians must be at the forefront of changing this reality and bringing life-affirming resources to pregnant women and their unborn babies. This is where churches can step in. More than half of abortion-seeking women identify as Christian or Catholic and often look to the church for help and guidance. Church leaders must be equipped to bring resources and empowering conversations to the pregnant, new moms, and their communities. Are you ready? Don't miss the nationwide event, Standing With Her Sunday on August 28th, and learn how you can support the most vulnerable in your community, so no woman stands alone.
Today we have a guest. You may or may not have heard of him. His name is Kristan Watson, and he's a political commentator. He's the host of Pensive Politics podcast, which comes out every Sunday at 3 p.m. And he also has a YouTube channel, Kristan Watson, and he's very active on Twitter. Kristan also serves as a spokesperson for Color Us United, a nonprofit that advances the principles of colored blindness. You can find out a lot about his work if you check out his podcast and follow him on Facebook or Twitter and Instagram at Official C Watson. So I want to introduce you to Kristan, and then we're going to talk about what our subject is. And this is a little different for the Explicitly Pro-Life podcast because we're going to talk today about queer theory and what queer theory and abortion have in common. It's a topic we have not really discussed at all on this podcast. So, Kristan, thank you for being my expert and coming on and joining me today.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
You had a really interesting Twitter kind of feed, which if you don't use Twitter, it's like a bunch of tweets that were one long, basically a paper, but Twitter limits how many characters you can use. So Kristan kind of went on this it wasn't a rant, but it was basically this long argument about some shocking things he found when he started researching queer theory and children and child innocence. And we thought it was really an interesting point that you were making, Kristan. And I'm really glad that you've been kind of trying to dig into this queer theory, something like I would have never studied. Because I think this is something a lot of parents, a lot of pro-lifers, a lot of Christians, a lot of people have been very concerned about, kids in kindergarten being asked to, ask what their preferred pronoun is, or teaching gender theory in the classroom, or having drag queens come into school story hours. We've all been very concerned. I think the Turning Red movie that was on Disney Plus just a couple months ago, got a lot of people talking and a lot of parents very concerned about what are we exposing our children to. So I think this is a really great, as pro-life advocates, we care about kids. And so I really wanted to delve a little bit into this issue. So how did you get started reading queer theory? So were you just bored one day and you picked up a book and were like, I want to read about queer theory?
If someone's that bored, then they've got serious problems. But no, in all seriousness, I began seeing, it really started when I began seeing the extent to which gender ideology was being pushed on children within the classroom. And since I'm someone, and in college, I studied philosophy, and I'm someone who likes to understand the origins of things, I wanted to ask myself, where did this come from? And more broadly, what is this a part of? Because I realized it's not just gender ideology. There is this broader postmodern movement that seeks to undermine values that we have held in the West to be near and dear to us, values which have radical implications for life and the preservation of life in the womb and outside of the womb. And so, as I kept digging and digging and digging, I found out that a lot of the gender ideology stuff is a part of a broader postmodern idea called queer theory. And that's really how I began going down the rabbit hole, listening to podcasts on it, going in and getting primary source texts and reading that, and unveiling some of the really odious things queer theorists have to say about some of the most cherished parts of our world.
Yeah, what really struck me about the Twitter thread you had done was this questioning that queer theory was putting out there of what is a child. And I mean, I guess we shouldn't be surprised, because now we can say that boys aren't boys, so I mean, we shouldn't be surprised, but it was really, I felt interesting that they were attempting to redefine, childhood, or what being a child was, and saying these things are like meaningless concepts, and that, sex and gender should be a part of a small child's life. I mean, how do you think this relates? The queer theory that you've delved into, how do you think this relates to abortion and protecting life?
Yeah, so if you challenge what a child is, you ultimately also challenge what life is, what the value of life is. And if you challenge that stable idea, you can reinvent it in such a way that excludes the life within the womb. And this is oftentimes what people who are on along this line of thinking like to do. And you mentioned that queer theory, yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that queer theory challenges what a child is. It gets even worse than that. Not only do they challenge what a child is, they create their own version and then try to say that version is what should be preferred. So there is this book called Curiouser on the Queerness of Children, which was released by the University of Minnesota Press, I think in 2006, 2007, has a bunch of different queer theorists talking about the idea of a child. And in that book, they're like, the idea of a child in society is concerned with innocence and, not doing anything to that child, right? Not exposing that child to anything inappropriate. But how are we sure that children are actually innocent? How do we know that's actually the case? And they began going down using the writings of Michel Foucault, who justified man-boy relationships in ancient Greece, to say, okay, perhaps there's some inner desire that kids have, but they're being shackled down by the heteronormative, the general idea of what it means to be a child. And therefore, it's time for us to bring that out with this project by defending the queer child.
Wait.
The queer child is...
Hold on.
Yeah.
Just
yes.
For the normal people. So you're saying they're alluding that maybe children have these sexual desires, but they're being suppressed by the heteronormative people. That would be like me.
Yes.
We're suppressing them.
Yes, that's the idea. The idea is that society puts the label of innocence on kids, that kids are not inherently innocent. And since the idea of innocence is socially constructed, we should be able to challenge that idea. That's the idea. Not only is this dangerous,
they're groomers.
It is literally it's grooming. It is grooming of the highest degree. It is justification, an attempted justification for pedophilia. It is a destructive philosophy. But they spend pages and pages and pages going through the history of this idea and justifying it, using a lot of different thinkers, by the way. They'll use Sigmund Freud, which we thought Freud was kind of gone by the wayside. They'll use him. They'll use Michel Foucault. They'll use Judith Butler, who in the 1990s wrote a book called Gender Troubles, and she's kind of the genesis of a lot of this stuff. She really contributed to queer theory in a huge way. They'll use so many different thinkers and just blend their idea into this very dangerous idea, and then they'll proceed with it. And it's very concerning. And what they'll say is, they'll say, well, we're just talking about the child as a literary object. Like, we just mean the child in terms of literature. But I'm like, no. You're going back through history, picking out very real instances of children, being preyed upon by people. And then you're saying, how can this inform how we see children? This is not a literary project. It is a very real world project, and it is a dangerous project.
Wow. I mean, I think this ties so much into the pro-life movement, because we know abortion popularized the abuse of children, because abortion really is the ultimate form of child abuse. And we've gotten to a point now where we deny reality openly. It should not come to a surprise to anyone that abortion kills a human being. And now everyone's like, wait, what? No, it's not. It's not a human being. I'm like, well, then what is it? They're like, it's a blob of cells. Okay, what species is the blob of cells belonging to? But we want to deny that. Life doesn't begin at conception. It begins when the human embryo finally implants into the uterine lining. That's when life begins. Well, no, your life began. It was just in a different location. So I think this all kind of ties in, where we're denying science, we're denying reality. Now we come up with our own terms. Wow, this is a lot. I mean, it's a lot to unpack too. I mean, you think about Planned Parenthood's role in this, and their whole role in the LGBTQ movement. Because it doesn't make sense if you think, okay, they kill babies for a living, and they profit off of killing babies. Because if they didn't profit off killing babies, why are they shutting down their abortion facilities now that Roe's been reversed? Try to prove now it's only 3% of what they do. But they have gotten really tight in bed with the LGBTQ lobby. And a lot of people were like, I know I've had supporters of Students for Life say, well, why do they care? Like, if you're having homosexual sex, you're not reproducing. But then you come to find out that Planned Parenthood is the second largest, I think the second largest, they may be the largest, I don't know, purveyor of hormone replacement drugs in the United States. So now they're actually replacing their abortion industry with giving young confused girls who are gender confused at 13 years old, sterilizing drugs to make them the man that they think that they woke up 2 days ago and thought that they were.
Yep. This sort of, for lack of a better word, intersection of different leftist movements coming together to make this one monstrosity is absolutely what we're seeing here. So it's interesting you mentioned Planned Parenthood. This racist eugenicist operation at its genesis is now being used to promote quote unquote equality when it was conceived to do the exact opposite. That's just so interesting to me. Like, how can you bear fresh fruit from a poison tree? You can't. That's just a separate point. But more generally about this, the idea of LGBTQ in Planned Parenthood, the queer theorists would view abortion restrictions the same way they view the idea of the child. They would view abortion restrictions as the product of a heteronormative idea about what life is, or rather not even a heteronormative, but just a general idea of what life is. And if you're a queer theorist, there is no objective value to anything. Everything is a matter of interpretation. And they get this belief from the idea of, and I'm going to use a obscure word here, but I'll explain, an idea of post-structuralism. It was a literary idea which responded to structuralism back in the 60s. Structuralism said that what matters most when reading literary works is what the author intended, right? And the words within those works relate to each other. Post-structuralism says the author's there, but what matters most is my interpretation. And so they take that idea of interpretation mattering, and then they apply it to everything else. They would apply it to abortion too. They would apply it to the idea of life, just like they apply it to the idea of children. Basically, it's your own smorgasbord, your own a la carte idea of the world. So if you can define,
which is like anarchy, because everyone just can make up their own definition of right and wrong.
It is definitional anarchy. Absolutely. So if you can define what a child is according to your own desires, you can define what a life is according to your own desires too. And you can therefore justify abortion.
Have there been any people who are pro-abortion come out to say this gender theory, redefining a child, redefining innocence is cray-cray? Like, no. Like, this, even this is too far for me as somebody who thinks babies should be ripped apart.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I can imagine that there are people who are pro-abortion who don't support this. I mean, there are a lot of the pro-abortion people, they're universally misguided, but they come in many different stripes.
That's right. Yeah, there are the extremists. They know exactly what's going on. The large majority of them have no clue and are just, the sheep from Animal Farm. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's so fascinating. I mean, this makes sense though, when you think about, who's one of the leading sex educators in our schools? Planned Parenthood. It's like having the tobacco industry go into our schools and tell our children not to smoke. They don't really care if they listen to what they say because they profit off of kids not listening, profit off kids not listening to them. Kids who have to come in and get an STD test or seek treatment, which they don't actually provide at a majority of the locations, or get a pregnancy test. But that makes sense because they have bought into queer theory themselves of redefining a child and childhood innocence, that children are sexual beings.
And more generally, they bought into the postmodern idea that your reality is everybody's reality. That's where queer theory comes from. Your idea of the world is should be everybody else's idea of the world. And this is where you get gender ideology.
Well, and that's counter to the whole, like, I can have my views and live my life. And you should be able to have your views and live your life. That's different, because this is now you're dictating your views and the way you want to live your life upon everybody else.
Yes, the words you just said, what were the goals of the American founding? They were the goals of the classical liberal tradition to ensure free expression and discourse between respectable, moral people. But unfortunately, the foundations for that discourse have been ripped apart by the rise of subjectivity and the sort of praise of the opinion as opposed to the verified, as opposed to the fact. And that praise, by the way, has penetrated every level of society. Unfortunately, the media is saturated with opinion. Nothing wrong with it. Hey, that's my line of work. I give opinions, but I recognize that there is a unhealthy balance between the amount of factual information being given and the amount of opinion being given. And when this is a social expectation, this can lead to bad places in terms of how we understand the world, how we understand society, how we understand certain topics. It can make us think, well, I have a right to an opinion, therefore I have the right to think whatever I want to think about this thing. Well, you can, but you don't have the right to define your own concept.
You have the right to be a moron, but you're choosing to be a moron and ignore the facts.
Exactly. You don't have the right to your own. You don't have the right to your own facts, but people think they do these days.
No, they really do. And I think that makes, that's so frustrating for, pro-lifers, when we're trying to say, no, like, look, 95% of biologists agree that at the moment of conception, a unique human being comes into existence. Now, you can deny that human being rights. You can say that human being only has certain rights at this point or at this location inside of a woman, or, in Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden's world, after the child's been born and the mother just has decided not to kill the child. But that doesn't entitle you to change the reality that it's still a member of our species. And that, I think it's so frustrating for many pro-lifers. I mean, I've started even questioning, like, some of our tactics we're using now in a post-Roe world of, maybe we just need to pull back from, stating basic fact, and we just need to win them emotionally on some of these things of their support for you. This is an anti-feminist decision because we've gotten so far down this rabbit hole of debating facts that are, like, clear. It's a question of how are you ever going to win if you're just trying to use science? Because they did openly deny science. We're going to have to, in order to win in terms of abolishing abortion, we're going to have to get down on their level and just speak emotional stories and emotional narrative. Like it's so weird to think about that of, well, I guess we just stop talking about the facts. Let's just talk about the emotion, how this abortion is going to make you feel bad. Because you obviously don't care about the facts. And I think that's so hard for people like me and, probably most of the people who tune in this podcast of like, what do you mean you don't care about facts and you don't want to find the truth and uncover the truth? But that's hard.
Well, and you guys are in the trenches every day. I respect what you guys do entirely. The cause of life is a worthy one. There's probably no more worthier cause than the cause of life. So I applaud it. Now, and so I understand that you guys are in the trenches, and I therefore don't want to say, well, don't do that, because that's not.
No, tell me your opinion. I'm very interested.
But what I would advise is this. There are many different ways of speaking to people, as you know. Pathos, logos, ethos, emotional appeal, logical appeal. The logos seems to be lost in a lot of people in modern day society, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it can still be integrated into the emotional appeal. Because if the emotional argument is purely an emotional argument, you'll get down to their level and you won't go beyond it, right? I like to liken a lot of these ideas, like the anti-life idea, the pro-choice idea, they call it. It's anti-life, really. I like to liken it to an oxbow lake, the part of a river that is cut off from the main river after the river has eroded a certain area and it's moved on. Well, the oxbow lake either dries up or it turns into a swamp where there's a bunch of dying plants because this doesn't have access to the main river. Therefore, there's no life in it. Everything in the lake stays in the lake. Well, if you were to then, I believe the pro-life movement in this analogy is on the main river going towards the ocean, going towards great success. But if you were to look over at the oxbow lake and say, okay, we got to go get those people, and you jump into the lake, you're cut off from the main river. You're contained in their ideology. You're contained in their terms. You're using their tools to fight them. And I don't think that's a very productive way to do things. I do think that we should learn from different people and how they persuade people, but we should never get down on the level of people who are absolutely incorrect. Because they're incorrect, they're wrong, their ideas go nowhere that are good. They go to destructive ends. So that's just my opinion. But I see two parts to the pro-life argument. I see the scientific argument, which establishes and verifies the existence of life in the womb. Then I see the moral argument, which justifies why that life should be preserved. The scientific argument appears to be lost on a lot of people. But I think if you can bridge the gap between verifying that life is there and the moral argument, most people, especially people who are misguided by the pro-choice argument, would take the moral argument, because most people don't want to kill someone if they think it's a life. You just have to get to that point through verification. That's the challenge. And how do you do that if people are not willing to listen? I wish I knew.
I was waiting for you to give me some great wisdom here.
Well, okay.
It's something I think about every night before I go to bed.
Actually, there's one idea I have. There's a reason why people believe what they believe. Everyone has a reason. It doesn't come from nowhere. And perhaps the approach should always be, okay, what is your view on this topic? Why do you believe what is in the womb is not a life? And what would need to be shown to you to demonstrate you to be incorrect? If you were to approach things like that, maybe you have, I'm sure you have, but if you were to approach things like that in every conversation, it wouldn't be as quick and easy as giving off facts, but you'd be able to establish a more deeper connection with that person because it's not just about giving out facts.
That's right.
It's also about relating to someone.
Yep.
If you're able to relate to them, they're more likely to listen to you.
Yep.
That's what I would do if I was in the situation, which is why, that's definitely what I would do. I would be just like, talk to them like, hey, okay, why do you believe this?
That's right.
What does life mean to you? Why do you think
that's right?
What is in the womb is not a life? When does life begin in you ask all these questions. Most people who are just taking an emotional understanding will not be able to answer most of those questions. They will crumble eventually.
Nope, that's exactly
And that's
correct.
when you can come in. That's when you can come in and hit them with wisdom.
Yeah.
But people who are like, yeah, sorry, go on.
No, you're right. It's the people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care principle. And that's why
Absolutely.
person-to-person conversations on campus or communities, like we've, in the past year and a half, Students for Life has knocked on 120,000 doors in 20 cities. And these are just in neighborhoods surrounding an abortion facility. And we're not politically campaigning. We're not talking about a candidate or voting. We're just saying, hey, did you know about all these pregnancy resource centers? Did you know about the nonviolent alternatives? Did you know about what's happening inside the abortion industry? And you're able to show them how much you care, how much that we do. And then you hear their reasons. Well, I hear you, but, and then you start to have that conversation. You start to build that rapport. Yeah, no, I know I want to go into something else that Students for Life is going to be launching, but I can't do that right now in this podcast. But this has been very helpful and informative for me personally, having this conversation and hearing your thoughts. But this has been a really great way, I think, to start this thought process of how we need to be careful as pro-lifers and as parents to really be paying attention to queer theory, and as it invades our school systems and it invades this cultural narrative out there. Where would you recommend somebody to go if they want to get more information about, like, is it just your podcast, follow your Twitter? Like, where can they go to get more information if they want to like dig in deeper and say, yeah, I think I need to know more about this?
Oh, yeah. So about queer theory, I would encourage them to go to, I don't want to encourage pirating, but there are many websites out there that have free books and you can find them pretty easily. And I would encourage you to go to those websites and look up two titles: Queer Theory Now, Foundations and Future, and Curiouser, that's Curiouser, on the queerness of children. If you want to know how queer theory relates specifically towards children, you read that book. If you want to understand queer theory in general, read Queer Theory Now. Those are the two books I recommend. I would also recommend people follow the great work of Dr. James Lindsay, who does a lot of work on the issue of queer theory and postmodernism. He's really good. He has he's on Twitter at Conceptual James, and he also has a website called New Discourses, where he covers not only queer theory, but every other postmodern ideology. He breaks it down very well. Now, I would like people subscribe to my channel, but that's a different story.
Well, where can people subscribe to your channel? Because I think you're going to have a lot of people who will be like, I've never heard Kristan, but I need to have listened to everything he says.
Absolutely. Well, my website's under reconstruction right now, or otherwise I would advise that. But you just go to YouTube and type in Kristan Watson Politics, and you can also go to any podcasting platform and type in Pensive Politics. I'm currently in the process of redeveloping my audio podcast as well. I need to post a lot of content that has not been posted yet. So my most up-to-date stuff is at my YouTube channel, Kristan Watson Politics.
And if you're really brave soul, you can go onto Twitter. I'm sure that whole tweet thread you did about queer theory made you a lot of friends on Twitter.
People got very mad at me, especially some of the theorists themselves. They're like, you don't understand theory. I'm like, what do I don't understand? And they went into pretzels. I'm like, okay, you're not making any sense. And so, but it was an impactful thread. I'd write it 10,000 times again if I could. I can't. Well, I can't. Well, maybe I cannot know, but I would write it 10,000 times again in general. And I think that people need to understand the truth about some of the cultural ideas that are shaping our moment here.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely right. I mean, I just think about the founding of Planned Parenthood. It's this eugenics organization that was meant to stop certain people from breeding. And procreating is what they called it. They used the word breeding like an animal. And it was all about sterilization. And so you think now, today, what Planned Parenthood's doing is this largest purveyor of hormone replacement therapy that's sterilizing our children. That's actually getting more back home to their roots than abortion was.
Interesting.
I mean, that's what they were about. Margaret Sanger wasn't actually for abortion and actually said she was against abortion. Planned Parenthood till like 1965 said abortion was killing a baby. They were for contraception, which they said that prevented a child from coming into existence, which prevented and would reduce certain stocks and breeds from having overpopulation growing families. But that it makes, when you see like the circle lining up of like, oh my gosh, them being this huge hormone replacement provider sterilizes our future. And that's exactly what Margaret Sanger wanted. It's exactly what they were founded to do.
Yep.
But yet the LGBTQ community is like, yeah, Planned Parenthood's our big friends. I'm like, actually, no. They're saying that you shouldn't be able to reproduce and that they're more than happy to make sure that happens. So thanks, Kristan, for coming on today. It was so great to meet you virtually and to introduce you to all the followers and listeners of Explicitly Pro-Life. Make sure you share this episode. This is a really unique episode. So thanks for tuning in, but make sure you share it and start some discussions, and feel free to message me or DM me or whatever you like to do. Bye, guys.